Hi, this is The Cross Connection and I'm Brent Little. Today I want to talk about the great demonstration. The problem of good and evil, pain and suffering has been pondered for millenniums. And for many it's very difficult, if not impossible, to understand why an all-powerful God would allow evil, pain and suffering. So the conclusion is drawn by many that there must not be a God, or that God is not all-powerful and is unable to stop evil. I'm taking a different approach. We never hear of people say that the existence of pleasure and happiness proves that there's no God, or that God is not all-powerful. Man develops massive building projects where it's clearly known beforehand that people will die from accidents related to that project, but they go ahead with the project in spite of that knowledge. Man builds automobiles that kill hundreds of people every day, but we don't conclude from that fact that man should not build or create anything. So where do we come up with this notion that we have a criteria that determines whether or not God gets to exist? And if God wanted to allow a certain amount of freedom for His creatures to make their own choices regarding good and evil, would it not defeat the very purpose God had in mind if He intervened every time an evil choice or act took place? Here's my thesis. Good exists because God is good. But if there is good, the opposite of good must also have the potential to exist. In eternity past, there was God, and therefore good existed. But even though its opposite, evil, also had the potential to exist, it had no means of expressing itself, and so it existed only in the abstract sense of an idea or concept. When God decided to create other beings, He realized that in doing so, it would create the potential for evil to take concrete form. Beings with the ability to choose between good and evil and subsequently act upon those choices. Keep in mind this too. God has created other beings besides humans. And I'm not referring to space aliens, flying saucers, greys, or lizard people. I'm referring to other beings in the heavenly realm, wherever that dimension is located. The Bible gives us a glimpse of some of these heavenly creatures, as for example, angels, seraphim, cherubim, very odd-looking living creatures with 4 faces, creatures with 6 wings and eyeballs all over. The New Testament briefly discusses some of these spiritual beings. For example, the Apostle Paul mentions 4 different categories of these unseen heavenly beings in Ephesians chapter 5. He mentions rulers, authorities, cosmic powers, and spiritual forces of evil. And in Colossians 1:16, he also mentions the thrones and dominions that these principalities and powers are associated with. Very weird, strange stuff, but a reality just the same. We know of Michael the archangel, and Gabriel the messenger angel, and of course Satan and his fallen angels and creepy creatures referred to as demons. Now, it's my best guess that God, being the creative being that He is, has also created a vast assortment of other beings that have not been revealed to us because they're not a part of the present plan that God has for us. Now, in any good creative process, a number of ideas and scenarios are developed in order to discover the best way to reach the development goal. Various plans, suggestions, development models, flow charts are all carefully considered. Numerous trials are run and refined until the best scenario for accomplishing the task is decided upon. Now, unlike us, God is infinite, whatever that means. And being infinite, God decided to create other beings, but with His plan to create these creatures, He also had a definite goal in mind, and that goal obviously required a sequence of planning and design events to bring that goal to fruition. The New Testament tells us that this goal for us humans is to be just like Jesus. The Bible elaborates a bit on this plan when it says God intends to bring many children home to glory wherever and whatever that might be. So, how is He going to accomplish that? Well, God, being infinite, was able to scan every scenario that could possibly exist. and from that extract the one best suited for the job of accomplishing his purpose. And apparently he has done just that. But the scenario he chose is not on the short list of best laid plans in our eyes as humans. So what was the scenario he chose? The very unlikely and distasteful scenario of a suffering planet. Out of all of the possibilities that existed for accomplishing his purpose, the one that would best accomplish this purpose for us is that of a suffering planet. And remember, in his infinite wisdom, he was able to view every single one of these multitudes of scenarios in minute detail and conclude that, however bizarre it might seem to us, that only a suffering planet was going to be effective to accomplish his purpose. Now, as humans in the midst of this suffering planet, it is hard or even impossible for us to imagine that such a choice would be the right one or would be made. But that's because we see so little of the overall plan and are experiencing the very unpleasant reality of that plan. But if we are to make any sense out of suffering, we need to surrender our finite ideas of what God can, should, and would not do, and surrender to the Creator's infinite view of past, present, and future realities. When I was younger, I used to go to the Rose Parade on New Year's Eve and watch the floats go by, and I only saw one float at a time. But when I went home and watched it on TV, there were aerial views of the parade, which allowed the viewers to see the entire line of floats from start to finish, all at the same time. Likewise, God's infinite wisdom and foreknowledge grants him a perspective on the suffering planet scenario that we cannot possibly begin to see or comprehend. And that's where the great demonstration comes into play. It involves the observation of a suffering planet by those other created beings that I referred to earlier. The great demonstration, in effect, is revealing to them God's infinite wisdom and demonstrating what things look like when He is not the one absolute governing authority in the universe. And if you'll pardon the crude illustration, Earth has become a petri dish of sorts, isolating these things called sin, self-will, and rebellion to one single location where the results of this sin can be observed and loathed by these other created beings. In essence, God may be pointing to the earth and to the horrific mess that human autonomy without God has created and saying, this is what it looks like when my ways are not observed and love is overrun by ego and self-centeredness and sin. So the myriad of other beings may have an all-important lesson to learn from this, and we're in the midst of the greatest moral lesson of our lives in the known universe, namely the horrific and very painful consequences of sin and rebellion. Ephesians 3:9-11 seems to hint at this idea when Paul tells us that his ministry was to bring to light for everyone to see what is the plan, or there's our scenario of the mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things, so that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might be made known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. Wow, unseen beings learning something about God's wisdom from this planet. If this helps you understand the issue of pain and suffering, great. If not, then toss it out and see if you can discover a better explanation. My goal is to help, so I hope I have done that here. Well, until next time, I'm Brent Little, and this is The Cross Connection.